Welcome. It's Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights here. The episode today is with Derek Grady, one of the VPs at Heritage Auctions. It's had a long and storied career in the industry. And we got in a roll and started talking, and I will carve that up into a couple of episodes for your listening pleasure. I really enjoyed hearing Derek's story, some of the things, what's going on in Heritage, as well as some of his other experiences, and just two veterans talking about what's old and what's new, what's coming back around in the industry, but all made possible by sponsors, certainly including Heritage, Derek's employer, and my good friends there, but also Huggins & Scott, ComC.com, Beckett Media, Beckett Grady, and Beckett Authentication, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, and Topps, Panini, and Upper Deck. So great sponsors, great interview with Derek. We had a good time, and let's turn it over to that conversation. Again, thank you for your listening support. If you got any questions, contact me at drjamesbeckett@gmail.com. So without further ado, here's Derek Grady.
The modern cards are just on another level. It's just pure craziness.
Well, when they're selling modern cards for more than a Wagner, it's just different. It's a different kind of bragging rights.
It really is. Yeah. Of players that are still playing that could still, Mike Trout, who
could mess up.
Absolutely.
And so much is baked into his price of the fact that he will, hit 900 home runs.
It's not going to happen. He's going to be lucky. Rob Rosen, the other VP, brought up to me that if you look at Albert Pujols' numbers and compare them to Mike Trout's going to be lucky to have Pujols' numbers.
For first 10 years, yeah. Albert Pujols, the first 10 years, if he did, he's fallen off, but he's old now.
No, he's old, but that's the thing. You're going to fall off some. It's going to be under 300. Is he going to have 660 home runs? Is he going to have over 2,000 RBIs? Is he going to win a title?
Can he make the playoffs?
Yeah. So it makes it, I'll tell you, that's a big gamble to me.
But he's not the you're a baseball fan, aren't you?
I'm an all sports fan, sure.
Yeah, but basically there's all this comparative stuff, but it seems like the newer people in the hobby only want to compare up. They don't want to compare laterally of who's in the Hall of Fame and this guy's a little better.
No, they don't seem to do that.
At the very top of the market and say, if that guy goes for that, then this guy might turn out like that. And therefore
Yeah, I was doing another interview the other day, and we were discussing, are these people that are buying modern cards, does that mean they will go back and buy vintage? And the answer to that is a lot of these people that are buying modern are only buying modern. Right. They are not going backwards and buying Mantle. So you can't so now a Mantle and 8 has to be worth $1 million because it doesn't work that way. They want modern cards. The one of one, super refractor. And I'm not going to tell them what to do. God bless them. They can do whatever they want to do.
But I think a few of them could migrate over there. But it is
some of them have, thank God.
Exactly.
True collectors will.
A lot of money. They need to have a lot of money.
Yeah. Did we not all start buying packs of, so when I started buying packs and I had my little Beckett guide in 1980, wonder who started that.
Yeah. Well,
that's what I was buying, 1980 cards, and I go and run to my little book and look up what the stuff was going for, and I got all excited, and I used your grade. How I became a grader, honestly, was I used your grading standards because so many people didn't. If they had the card and it wasn't run over, everything was near mint or X-mint. I literally took it literally. Here's the card in this condition, here's the card in that condition. But we all started so I started in 1980 buying packs. Then when I put them away for a few years. We got into girls. Then I came back to it, and my friend said, hey, did you see this coin store? There's cards over there. And I couldn't believe I could buy these cards that were in the Beckett book prior to 1980, and I was hooked forever. And here I am.
Well, the moment of truth in those days was, are you going to work your way forward or are you going to work your way back? The smart people thought, okay, it's 1980. I'm going to start working the 70s, the 60s, and they should have worked their way back as fast as they could. Pete Calderon, the only guy I've talked to that's immediately was an e-card guy from his grandfather.
Yeah, he loved it.
Most people were really just they would collect what's being promoted, and what's being promoted is the current packs.
My only question would be, so once you sold Beckett, correct? And what have you remained on as a consultant, or are you just What are you doing? Are you just retired? And what do you do now?
Well, it's been 15 and a half years.
Yeah.
It's astounding to me. And I'm doing a podcast every day, but I waited 15 years overly respectfully to not to intrude on a company that bears my name, but I'm listed as an advisor, but I'm unpaid, although I get best customer treatment if I want to use the services.
Okay.
But, and I've still been a hobbyist. It's hard to take your full-time work vocation that used to be your hobby and turn it back into a hobby. So I'm messing around with my cards and trying to, sell off some stuff. But I have this running thing with Chris Ivy is that, what I want to sell is what I don't want. Just, why don't you sell this stuff that we would really like to sell? So I know you can do that, but that's the stuff I really enjoy. That'll be the last stuff I sell.
That'll be the last stuff.
And trust me, my wife has your numbers. So but it's a bunch of stuff. So I'm trying to thin things out. I'm going slow and having fun with it and doing a little bit more shows, but I'm not a setup guy. I just, I love cards. But I've got it's a second regime now since I sold. And the first regime, I had a little, those are the ones I sold to. So I had a little closer relationship with those guys. But they probably weren't radical enough. And they were in some respects, but they were a New York publishing roll-up and kind of treated it mostly like a 20th century company. And the new guys, which I'm not as tight with, have treated it more as a 21st century database company that's offshores a bunch of things and does all that. So not the way I would do it, but I need to allow them to do their stuff. They've earned the right to do it. And I've got enough friends still there in the hobby and around town, as well as at the company, that I want the brand has my name on it. I want it to do well, but it's not the only game in town. It's the hobby's strong. There's other ways for people to get prices. There's other ways for people to get their cards graded. There's other sources for things. So I'm not a monopolist, but I'd like to come in first place, but I'm I'm on my own now. So I'm a little independent.
Gotcha.
That's good. So it allows me to enjoy the podcast and reconnect with people and get to know some people that I know a little bit better and get some oral history out there. But I don't want it to be strictly vintage, even though that's probably my love. So I'm trying to, spread it around. But you're, again, when you got started, 1980 wasn't vintage in 1980. It was, and
that was modern.
I think people are willing to take vintage up to 1989, which is very scary to me.
That just makes us old. Yeah, we're old.
It's just astounding. And even 1980, there's some unbreak it there. And even that to me is not vintage, but it's, again,
that's not vintage to me either. I look in the probably 75 and before. Some people say 1969 and before, but I try and keep 75. 89 is scary to me because it just makes me old. Because I remember where I was buying 80.
It's like Upper Deck brought in the modern era or something.
It did. That can't be
vintage.
That was that was like the modern revolution with Upper Deck, what they did. That was a huge.
Make 1988 prehistoric. No, and you can. One of the theories I have is that you can go almost by pop reports, and not just by how many cards are graded, but how the grading shakes out. To me, it's vintage if you have trouble finding 8s, 9s, and 10s.
That's a good point. Yeah.
It's another adage for me. Okay, I gave this, and I don't know that it's appeared. This may have appeared in the other episode that Pete hasn't, but I asked Pete the rhetorical question. Somebody calls you up, Derek, and they say they've got a collection. And then you get another call the next day. Somebody says, I've got a collection. They're both like 45 years old. The first guy says, I've got a great collection. It's worth $100,000. Are you interested? The second guy who calls up the very next day, same age, same whatever. And he says, I've got a great collection. Are you interested? It's a $5 million collection. So my rhetorical question to Pete is, not knowing anything else, which guy has more cards?
Wow.
And I said, I think it's flipped. If somebody is 45 years old and they have a $5 million collection, I'm betting they don't have that many cards.
With you. I am absolutely with you.
You hear what I'm saying? And the 100,000 has got all these sets that are.
I travel more. The reason I'm on the East Coast, Jim, is I travel more than any of our other consignment guys, okay? I'm a grader, so I go on most of I'm all over the place. You would not believe what $100,000 collection can pack up an SUV and have tens of thousands of cards. Or a $100,000 collection could be 5 cards or 2 cards. A $5 million collection could literally be 100 graded cards.
I'm saying that's
I'm with you.
I know people like that. So
I'm with you.
Getting that. In fact, you're seeing it in person.
Firsthand.
You get first dibs. You're firsthand.
And if you think it's so I've made the argument when we're given seller's fees, when you give me a truckload vintage sets where we have to go through, do the grading percentages, send out the cards for grading, or you give me Don Lucius's number PSA registry collection. Everything's graded. Every card was graded. You photograph them, you write them, you lot them appropriately. When you get them raw, there's a huge cost.
There's a cost. And so that's worth talking about, because I think people, I was doing some stuff, and my grader of choice is BGS, obviously, but
Sure.
I fully respect the other.
Kind of has your name on it.
It does have my name on it. But, and unfortunately, to me, I could almost make the case that they're tougher on me, which doesn't, I think they're just tough. But
I think all the grading companies are, Jim. If you go back to when it started, when PSA created the standard for professional grading, and you look at 8s that were great, or 9s back then, okay? Now, the same cards. Yeah. You can't get 8s in those same kind of 8s and 9s. So I've always told people when I first got to SGC, buy the card, not the holder.
No, buy the serial number.
Buy that too.
Buy the lowest serial number.
Look at the card. Because if I've gone through so many collections where there's 8s that look like 9s, there's 8s that look like 6s, and people have asked me to help them weed out as they've gotten a better eye over time. They don't like looking at 8s that would be 6s today. So I've actually helped them thin the herd of some of try to upgrade some cards, because the standards have changed. And there's no reason to apologize for it. As well as I do through different decades, different collectors, standards change, graders change. But right now, I think every grading company is pretty tight overall.
Do you think the change has gone toward a greater emphasis on eye appeal?
I think, thank God, that's finally happened, because eye appeal means something. Because we used to, so at SGC at one point when I got there, when I was the head grader, a crease would just kill a card. A back crease, it could be mint on the front, and a little back crease, we would take it down to a 4. Now, hindsight, how can you not be X mint or X if it's mint on the front? Meanwhile, you have a card with 4 hit corners, okay? 4 bent corners, maybe some scratches on it, and it's a 4 or a 5. Anybody would rather have that card that's mint with a little back crease. I had to change and adapt to it, but the thing that taught me the most was when I left SGC, was at Mastro for 5 years, came back to SGC. So you see the other side of the table. I think all graders, it's very important to see the other side of the table and notice that, as opposed to just sitting there technically, okay, and grading. You need to see what collectors are buying and what dealers are selling, what eye appeal. I think they've actually gone, so to your point, eye appeal means a ton. Secondly, and then if I ever got back into grading again, I would make that part of the emphasis. But then centering, I think they've gotten completely carried away with what can be mint. And if it just looks off center, and 52s have wide borders, okay? So a Mano and a 52 Mano and an 8 could look really off center and not look that nice because they've got those big borders. And people say, how can that be an 8? Because they don't pay attention to reading the standards, okay? But 2 to 1 can be an 8, assuming the corners are nice and everything else is there. And people have just gone crazy with wanting centered cards to the point where they don't mind giving up some corner wear, okay, to have a centered card. Me, when I first started collecting, I loved cards that looked mint right out of the pack. So unfortunately, the cards I put away, I would buy mint cards that were off center because that's the way they came out of a pack. And to me, corners meant everything back then in the 80s when I was buying. So then when it came time to be a grader and I go back into my stuff to see what I had, I was like, crap. Most of my stuff is OC, but it has 4 razor sharp corners. And the stuff that I had that was centered with 4 razor sharp corners, that's 9s and 8s. And I still have that laying around somewhere because I couldn't grade my own cards as a grader. So I still have that packed away in a basement. But I got so irritated because I was buying, again, right out of a pack type cards. I love that stuff. I didn't mind the centering. Now I actually do like stuff better centered as well.
Yeah, centering's a big deal for me. In fact, what's not a big deal for me is one soft corner. I did an episode a long time ago about like an 18-inch rule where you hold the card 18 inches in front of you, and you can't, whether it's slabbed or not, you can see whether it's centered. You can see if there's some problems on the surface, if there's some notching or something. But a very soft corner, you can't see except under magnification. To me, I'm not saying it's a 10. I'm not even saying it's a 9 or an 8. I'm just saying that's a very pleasing card.
Yeah, I agree.
Up on my wall, people would have to get very close to it to see that it's not perfect. It looks great. And some of the people you've apparently done, even though you've been with SGC twice, then
twice, 2 different, two different reigns.
And you've done you haven't worked for Beckett.
I haven't worked for Beckett, and I haven't worked for PSA. I won their 2. They won their contests they had for grading. They had 2 of them. I won them both times.